Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another tier list. Today, we're going to be going through the discography of the Mamas and the Papas, another awesome group to come out of the mid 60s with their beautiful vocal harmonies and their unique and tasteful blending of folk rock, pop rock, and sunshine pop. And similar to other bands we've covered in this series, they were only together for a relatively short period of time and only put out a handful of albums, but they have clearly left their mark on the world of music and have written countless songs that will forever be timeless. So what I'm going to do today is go through their 5 studio albums, starting with If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, and going up to People Like Us, and I will score each of them on this tier list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll talk a bit about each album, let you know my thoughts, and we will see where we end up. And please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree, and how you would rank these 5 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. Alright, I think that's about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, starting out, we have their debut studio album from 1966 titled If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, and I will give this an S. Amazing debut album, and this one would go down as my favorite Mamas and the Papas record. I think the majority of this album is incredibly strong. The songwriting is very unique and tasteful. The instrumentation is great and complements the vocals very nicely. We've got the classic studio musicians, the Wrecking Crew, playing on this, and the production from Lou Adler is perfect and works beautifully with this sort of group and vocal setting. It's got 12 tracks with 6 on each side, and stylistically it features a nice blend of folk rock and pop rock, and it features 5 covers and 7 originals, mostly written by John Phillips, with a couple of contributions from Michelle Phillips and Denny Doherty. Side 1 opens up very strong with the beautiful and classic Mamas and the Papas hit Monday, Monday, which hits us right away with their beautiful vocal harmonies. A very pretty song that starts the album out very nicely on a more folk rock vibe and does a nice job alternating between male and female lead vocal parts. And then that is followed by another original titled Straight Shooter, which is more of a rock track, a solid song, but for me personally, I always do tend to resonate with more of their folk rock styles, but this one is certainly not a bad song by any stretch. And then that is followed up by my second favorite Mamas and the Papas song titled Got a Feelin'. An absolutely incredible song with such a dreamy and serene mood to it that I love so much. Beautiful vocal melodies and harmonies, and a great chord progression in the guitar with a colorful key change between the first and second section. This would be by far my favorite song on this album, and I do consider this one to be pretty underrated. I don't hear people mention this song very much, and I think it's an absolutely beautiful song. After that, we have a song written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney titled I Call Your Name, and this is one of the tracks on this album that I could do without. I don't find this song particularly interesting compared to everything else on here, but luckily after that, side 1 concludes on a strong note with 2 more really solid tracks, starting with a cover of Do You Wanna Dance, which they do a very pretty folk interpretation of, and then they wrap up side 1 with another incredible original titled Go Where You Wanna Go, which would definitely be another favorite track of mine from this album and a rock solid closer for side 1. Side 2 then has another 6 tracks, opening up with California Dreaming, which is obviously one of the best Mamas and the Papas songs of all time. After Got a Feelin', this would definitely be my second favorite track on here, and in my opinion, one of the best singles released in the entirety of 1965. Everything about this song is perfect. The amazing vocal harmonies, the colorful chord progression, and the amazing production. And then that is followed up very nicely with a cover of a song written by Jerry Leiber and Phil Spector titled Spanish Harlem, a very mellow track with really beautiful vocal work and great instrumentation with the addition of the electric violin and xylophone. Then we go into more of a rock and soul vibe with Somebody Groovy, which is the one track from side 2 that I'm not super crazy about. Again, like I said before, I do tend to resonate with more of the folk rock tracks, but that's just a stylistic preference on my part, and I could definitely understand why some people do like these tracks, but it's just really not for me. And then after that, we have Hey Girl, which is another one in more of a pop rock vibe. But I will say, I do find this song much more enjoyable than the previous one. I think there's more interesting stuff going on here between the vocal melodies and chord progressions. Then after that, we have my favorite cover song from the album, which is You Baby, which was written by Steve Barry and P.F. Sloan, a beautiful pop song that was popularized by the Turtles, and I think this interpretation of it is very nice as well, and it works really well with their vocal lineup. Then the album concludes with another cover of a more rock track titled The In Crowd, a great Mama Cass feature, and a solid rock track to wrap up this album. And even though there are 2 tracks on here that I could do without, and a couple that are not my favorites from a stylistic perspective, I think the good songs on here greatly outweigh the songs that I'm not into, and all of the songs that I do like on here are of such high quality that it wouldn't feel right putting this anywhere but S tier. The songwriting is very tasteful and unique, especially for 1966, and if I was making a list of my top 10 favorite Mamas and the Papas songs, this album would probably contain the largest amount of songs on that list, with Got a Feelin', California Dreamin', Go Where You Wanna Go, and You Baby. So an awesome debut album and my favorite Mamas and the Papas record. This one gets an S. Alright, next we have their second studio album from 1966, which is a self-titled album titled The Mamas and the Papas, and I will also give this one an S. Another amazing album, and for me this is a very close second to the first release. I like the first album slightly more, but this one definitely does give it a run for its money in my opinion, and I think it contains just as many exceptional and standout tracks. During the recording of this album, John Phillips would discover that his wife Michelle was having an affair with Gene Clark from the Byrds, and she would then be fired from the group and replaced with producer Lou Adler's girlfriend Jill Gibson. But after some time, they realized that Jill wasn't a good fit with the group, and Michelle would actually rejoin a month before the album was released. So this album would actually feature both Michelle and Jill on it. And just like the first release, it's got 12 tracks with 6 songs on each side. This time we only have 2 covers though, and 10 originals. And this one opens up on a more poppy note with No Salt on Her Tail. A very pretty song with some nice additional organ added onto it from Ray Manzarek of The Doors. Then they keep that sort of pop rock energy going with track 2 titled Trip, Stumble, and Fall. Another solid song with a cool feel change between the 2 main sections. Then after that they hit us with the first real folk rock track of the album titled Dancing Bear, which I absolutely love and would definitely be a favorite of mine on this album. An absolutely beautiful song with a really rich instrumentation that adds such a nice additional layer to the track with the oboe, flute, and bassoon. Again, with the Wrecking Crew on Personnel. That little instrumental intro is just so unbelievably beautiful, and to me songs like this really contain the magic of the Mamas and the Papas sound. Then that is followed up by another original, more in the pop rock realm, titled Words of Love, an amazing track with a really cool vocal melody and a great lead feature for Mama Cass. Side 1 then concludes with the 2 covers from this album, starting with a nice folky interpretation of the Rodgers and Hart jazz standard My Heart Stood Still, and then a cover of Dancing in the Street. And for me personally, the Dancing in the Street cover is not my favorite cover that they've ever done, and in general, I kind of always prefer more originals over covers because I think they always knock the originals out of the park, but still not a bad song. Just for, stylistic preferences, it doesn't resonate with me as much as some of the other covers that they have done. Side 2 then features 6 more originals, and Side 2 is interesting for me because it has the 2 songs that I don't really like on this album, but also contains 3 songs that I think are absolute masterpieces. It starts out with I Saw Her Again, which is a solid pop song that gives us some hints of the Beatles, and a great way to kick off Side 2. And then that is followed up by my second favorite song from this album, Strange Young Girls, an absolutely beautiful song with so many lush vocal harmonies and just such a moody song. The intro is so gorgeous on this one too. But after that, we have one of the 2 songs that I'm not crazy about with I Can't Wait. I just don't find anything about this song particularly exciting. But the song that follows that is actually my number 1 favorite Mamas and the Papas song, Even If I Could. To me, this song is absolutely perfect, and similar to what I said about Got a Feelin', I would consider this to be one of their most underrated tracks. Everything about this song is amazing. The instrumentation, the vocal melodies and harmonies, the energy and intensity of the track, and the interesting groove in the drums. A perfect song that contains everything that I love about the Mamas and the Papas in one track. Then after that, we have the one other song that I'm not crazy about with That Kind of Girl. I would say this one is slightly better than I Can't Wait, but still nothing particularly exciting in comparison to the other great songs that we heard up to this point. I do absolutely love the closer though, titled Once Was a Time I Thought. A super cool vocal-centered track with a lot of fast triplet vocal figures and some cool classical sorts of melodic and harmonic movements going on. Just a perfect closer to an amazing album. So similar to the first release, it does have a couple of songs that I could do without, but once again, it has a few songs that would definitely make my top 10 favorite Mamas and the Papas song list, with Even If I Could, Dancing Bear, and Strange Young Girls. And like I said, it does contain my favorite Mamas and the Papas track with Even If I Could, and I would also consider Once Was a Time I Thought to be their best closing track of any album as well. So there are a lot of great things about this album, and it's an amazing follow-up to their very hard-to-follow debut album. So this one will also get an S. Okay, next we have their third studio album from 1967 titled The Mamas and the Papas Deliver, or more commonly referred to as Deliver. And I will give this one a B. This was a really hard one to score because there are a lot of things that I do really enjoy about this record, but at the same time it does have some aspects of it that I'm not super crazy about, and I really had to think about this one for a while. Of all 5 records on here, this was the one that I was the most conflicted about and took the most amount of re-listens and really, contemplating what I wanted to score it. But ultimately, it did feel most fitting to put it in B tier. Just like the previous 2 albums, this one features 12 tracks with 6 songs on each side, and we have 8 originals and 4 covers, and side 1 features all 4 of the covers, while side 2 is all originals. It opens up with a cover of a track titled Dedicated to the One I Love, which is an absolutely incredible and very beautiful opening track. And the biggest compliment that I will give this album is that I do think that this song is the strongest opening track of any Mamas and the Papas album, and another song that would easily make my top 10 favorite song list of theirs. A great lead vocal feature for Michelle Phillips as well. After that, we go into a cover of My Girl, which is just a song choice that I'm not particularly interested in hearing them cover. Again, I would have preferred more originals, or maybe a cover choice that is just more stylistically similar to the opening track. But after that, we have the first original, which is a solid track titled Creaky Alley, an acoustic track that's sort of somewhere in between folk and pop. A very enjoyable song, and my second favorite track from side 1. After that, they do a cover of another Rodgers and Hart song titled Sing for Your Supper, which was from the musical The Boys from Syracuse. And I think that this song is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's incredible, but I do think it is one of the better songs on side 1. And then the next 2 songs that conclude this side is really where it kind of loses me. We have a cover of Twist and Shout, and then an original track titled Free Advice that I find to be pretty boring. And I think for me, side 1 is really the main reason why I put this in B tier, because while it does have a couple of songs that I enjoy and does have an amazing opening track, I do find about half of side 1 to be pretty underwhelming and bland. I do think the album does get a lot better on side 2 though, and is another reason why I would have preferred more originals compared to covers, because once they give us a side of 6 originals, I do think that it picks up the momentum of the album a good amount. It opens up with an absolutely beautiful track titled Look Through My Window. It's got great instrumentation, again with the Wrecking Crew on Personnel, beautiful vocal harmonies, and really strong melodies. And then it goes into a more rock territory with Boys and Girls Together, which is another track that I really enjoy. It's got a really cool and chill groove to it, and I would consider this to be one of the more underrated Mamas and the Papas tracks, at least from this album. And from this track and onward, the remainder of the album is primarily centered on the female vocals, which I like, and I think it contrasts John's vocals very nicely. We go into another solid track titled String Man, and similar to the previous track, this is another song with a really cool vibe and really great vocal melodies. songs. And up to this point, I think side 2 has been very strong. Then once we get to the second half of side 2, I don't think that any of these songs are bad, but I do think that the momentum does dip down a little bit, starting out with an instrumental track titled Frustration. And I do think that this song is good. It's by no means a bad instrumental, but I also wouldn't say it's an exceptional song that sticks out from this album. And the song after that is Did You Ever Want to Cry, which I sort of have similar feelings about. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's not bad either. I do think the closing track is very cool, though. It's a minute-long song titled John's Music Box, which is an instrumental music box piece that's very psychedelic and is a really nice little minute-long come-down that wraps up the album in a very interesting and unexpected way that I find very enjoyable. So I do think that this album has some really good high points, particularly with the opening track, as well as Creaky Alley, Look Through My Window, and Boys and Girls Together, but I do think it also has its fair share of tracks that aren't of the highest quality, and I would consider it to be a bit of a downgrade from the first two albums, but certainly not a bad record by any means, just not as strong as the first two, in my opinion, and to be fair, those are very hard albums to follow. So I would say this is an okay album, but not amazing. This will get a B. Okay, moving on, we have their fourth studio album from 1968 titled The Papas and the Mamas, and I will give this one an A. A very good album, and I would definitely say it's an improvement from the previous release. I resonate more with the stylistic choices on here, and I think the quality of the tracks is more consistent throughout this. This album is also a little bit darker at times, which I think is really cool, and I like hearing more of this side to their writing. It opens up with a short little solo vocal number, which is a Shirley Temple cover titled The Right Somebody to Love, and I think this is a really nice little opener that has a real sweet quality to it. And then it goes into an absolutely beautiful folk rock track titled Safe in My Garden. This would be my favorite song on this album, and also would make my top 10 favorite Mamas and the Papas song list. It brings things in very nicely, and then that is followed up with another amazing and beautiful song titled Meditation Mama, which is John Phillips' first entirely lead vocal song. I really love the instrumentation on this one. I'm not sure what that instrument is that is happening underneath the female vocal part, but it creates such a magical sound that I love so much. And up to this point, I think the album is off to a great start. Then when we get to track 4, that is the one song that I'm not crazy about on side 1, titled For the Love of Ivy. I'm not sure why I'm not into this one. I've just never found it particularly exciting. But after that, side 1 concludes very strongly with two back-to-back really great tracks, starting with a beautiful interpretation of the jazz standard Dream a Little Dream of Me, and then an awesome original titled Mansions, which has a really dark and eerie quality to it that I think contrasts the mood of the other songs very nicely. Probably my second favorite song from this album. And then side 2 opens up on a more rock vibe with Gemini Child. This is a song that I'm sort of indifferent about. I don't dislike it, but I wouldn't say that I like it either. And the two songs that follow it, I would have similar feelings about, with Nothing's Too Good for My Little Girl and Too Late. I would say that Too Late is probably the best song of those three, but I don't think that any of those three tracks really stick out from this album. But after that, I think the album concludes very strongly with three back-to-back awesome songs with 12:30, Rooms, and Midnight Voyage, all of which are originals. 12:30 would easily be my favorite track from side 2, an absolutely beautiful song, and I've always particularly loved the chord progression and vocal melody on Rooms. I think that's another underrated song from this album, a super cool vibe, and just a very unique sounding song. And Midnight Voyage is a rock-solid closer with beautiful vocal layers, a nice instrumentation with the acoustic guitar and pianos on top of one another, and just beautiful vocal work from Cass Elliot. So this album does have a couple of tracks that I'm not crazy about, but I do think it is more consistent than Deliver, and I do think it has more standout tracks like Safe in My Garden, Meditation Mama, Dream a Little Dream of Me, Mansions, 12:30, Rooms, and Midnight Voyage. So a very good album. This one will get an A. Okay, and lastly, we have their fifth and final studio album from 1971 titled People Like Us. And I'm going to give this one a C, unfortunately. Not a great album, in my opinion. And 3 years prior to the release of this record, the group had actually broken up, but their record label had found a clause in their contract that said that they needed to produce one more album to fulfill their duties. Otherwise, they would have ended up owing a lot of money, and that resulted in the release of this album. And I don't think that this album is terrible, but it just feels like there's something missing throughout this, and it doesn't contain that same magic that we got from the previous 4 albums. The folk elements are almost completely gone on this, and it goes into much more of a 70s rock sort of style. And to be fair, that was a very common thing for a lot of 60s bands, where their sound started to go into some different territories in the early 70s. But I think with a band like the Mamas and the Papas, their folk songwriting was so strong, and to completely abandon that on this album, I think was really to the detriment of the record. It's all originals, and it's got 12 tracks with 6 on each side. And I actually do think that side 1 has a couple of songs that are good. I do really enjoy the opening title track, People Like Us, and I also like Snow Queen of Texas and Lady Genevieve. I could definitely do without Pacific Coast Highway and Step Out. Both of those songs really don't do anything for me. And even though I do like 4 of the 6 songs on side 1, I wouldn't say that any of these would make my favorite Mamas and the Papas song list. And this is the only album that doesn't contain any tracks that make that top 10 list. So while I don't think that side 1 is bad, side 2 is really where it starts to lose me. Just a lot of boring and mediocre songs, in my opinion, that really don't offer the listener anything new or exciting to latch onto. The only 2 tracks on side 2 that I don't mind are Pearl and the closing track, Blueberries for Breakfast. Again, though, neither of these tracks would be regarded as favorites of mine. Just in the context of the entire album, I would say that those are the 2 tracks that kind of carry side 2, but I really only enjoy about half of the songs on this album, and the other half I do find to be pretty uninteresting. And like I said, it definitely feels like it's missing that Mamas and the Papas flair, with the folk elements almost completely gone, and the songwriting style just going into directions that I don't think were the best. But at the same time, they didn't have intentions of making this album until this whole thing with the record company came up. So under the circumstances, it makes sense, because this album was basically just written out of necessity rather than out of inspiration and desire to continue to keep creating new stuff. And unfortunately, I think it resulted in a pretty mediocre album. So not one of my favorites. My least favorite Mamas and the Papas album. Unfortunately, this one will get a C. All right, so those are my takes on their 5 studio albums. A lot of really great stuff all throughout this discography. And like I said at the beginning, this is a band that had a really beautiful and unique sound, and they really left their mark on 60s music and produced some incredible and timeless songs. And yeah, that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was enjoyable. And if you are interested, please feel free to check out some of my other tier lists, which will be linked in the comments and the description, and see if there's anything else that you might like. And like I said, please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree, and how you would rank these 5 studio albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, that is it for today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.